Well, good evening from Troon Town Hall for the 57th meeting of the Wee ALBA Book Tour. It's a lively audience. There's all sorts of other things going on in the hall, but right tonight, it's number 57 of the Wee ALBA Book.
Distinguished guests, welcome to Troon. On behalf of the ALBA party in South Ayrshire, I'd like to thank everybody in attendance for coming tonight, as well as Independence Live for coming along and filming and everybody tuning in at home. This is the second Wee ALBA Book Roadshow to have taken place in South Ayrshire, and as Alex just said, the 57th across the country so far. Since its formation, the individuals who have come together under the banner of ALBA have defined the party by their tireless efforts and dedication to create a viable political party which is driven by its members. Those of us who have taken an active role in ALBA do what we do day in, day out, because we have a duty to Scotland and its people. In 2 years, ALBA have attained a membership equal in number to the Scottish Green Party and greater than the Lib Dems, organisations which have existed for decades and currently have MSPs. I have no doubt that this fact, along with the tremendous ethos of enthusiasm and teamwork already present within ALBA, will eventually translate into ALBA elected representatives at all levels of government, the length and breadth of this country. When that day comes, if those representatives are anything like our two excellent MPs, Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanvey, then they will be a credit to the party and their constituents. On the day that ALBA was announced, our party leader said that he believed that ALBA could encapsulate the spirit of 2014 in the form of a political party. As someone for whom the referendum was the reason that they became involved in politics in the first place, this was a very appealing concept. Like many of you in this room, I was once an SNP member. Resigning from the SNP 2 years ago was not a decision which I took lightly. However, it is a choice which I have never regretted. Incidentally, some of you in the audience tonight may still be members of the SNP, and you're most welcome here. On Saturday in Stirling, 6,000 Scots from all parties and none gathered in the spirit of the 2014 referendum. For all the talk of a divided movement, the sense of shared purpose and camaraderie was still there for all to see in the glorious sunshine of Bannockburn. It is a testament to the hard work of the people who comprise the grassroots of the independence campaign that 9 years on from 2014, support for independence has remained stable. They are the ones who have kept the flame burning because they have never given up on their belief in Scottish control over Scotland's destiny. In contrast, the party of government in Scotland chose to have an internal meeting at the same time, from which they excluded not only their coalition partners in the Scots Parliament, but representatives from any other independence supporting party. The outcome of this meeting was essentially the proposition that the national movement should continue with the same tired and self-evidently failed strategy which has seen the political progress of the cause stagnate. Even though those of us who left the SNP to join ALBA over the past few years believe that it was necessary to form a new political vehicle to achieve independence, we understand that there are many people out with ALBA who share our absolute determination to save and liberate Scotland by bringing the national cause to a successful conclusion with urgency. To that end, ALBA is in favour of contesting the next UK general election under a Scotland United ticket, which will unite the various pro-independence parties and organisations under a common purpose and offer the electorate the chance to cast their ballot for a single nationalist candidate in each constituency. And if they do so, it will be taken as a clear indication to immediately begin negotiations with the UK government, not for a referendum, but for the immediate separation of Scotland from the Union. The national cause represents all that we hold dear about our country, and sometimes the things that we take for granted. The ground we walk on, the water we drink, the air we breathe, and everyone who lives here. The decisions and actions taken by Scots who are alive today will affect the lives of millions of future Scots, born and unborn, and the people who inhabit Scotland currently have the potential to be the generation which set our country free. The leaders of pro-independence parties who have so far shown reticence towards ALBA's Scotland United proposal must reconsider, for if they are unwilling to work with others in putting country before party, then they will rightfully be scorned by future generations for their selfishness and inaction. To grudgingly accept the constitutional impasse and continue to do more of the same is simply not an option. ALBA exists not only to gain independence, but to implement bold and innovative measures to improve the lives of every resident of this country. The Wee ALBA book, combined with our policy platform, outline a positive, prosperous and inspiring vision for the Scotland which we seek to create. A republic of citizens, not subjects, with a written constitution which enshrines the sovereignty of the Scottish people and equal rights for all. A new Scotland in which good jobs, a wage in which you can live well, decent homes and an end to poverty are not merely aspirations but reality. We must have a society where the people of Scotland benefit from the enormous wealth generated from Scotland's resources. When Scots are inevitably once again faced with the burden of an unexpected global crisis, we must have an independent government of our own, truly representative of the people, with the unfettered ability to tailor policy in response to the needs of the people. Friends, if we wish to see the day when Scotland's national rights are restored, then we must be prepared to fight for them together as a collective, and hundreds of thousands of Scots' sons and daughters will answer the call and shout with one voice. To quote a line from a film that I watched some time ago starring George C. Scott, "If not us, who? And if not now, then when?" Every person in Scotland has their own part to play, but there is still much more to be done. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John. That was an introduction from John Caddis, the LACU convener here. Can I start by saying a very warm welcome to you all here in Troon. Apologies to those of you watching online. We actually waited for you, and the real reason we couldn't start the meeting at 7:30 was because there was a Zumba class just behind us, and the music played was giving us copyright issues, which means we might have been switched off when Alex was mid-flow, and we couldn't have had that. But what you did miss was that Alex gave us a stand-up act, which was 15 minutes of pure gold, none of which you will get to see, but everyone here enjoyed it nonetheless. So you are all very welcome indeed, and can I take this opportunity, as I always do, to thank Independence Live, Gary and Stuart for bringing this event to you this evening. And I'm very excited to be here. I was even more excited when Denise Finlay, who wonderfully organises all of these meetings, told me that our next Wee ALBA book meeting was at South Beach. She didn't tell me it was in Troon, though. Nonetheless, I wasn't disappointed, and this is our 57th meeting, 57, I suppose, as in the Heinz varieties, of which there are supposedly 57, so the logo says. But I suppose that's an indication that there are many parties who want independence. We all want the same aim for our country, want freedom for our country, want independence for our country. And I expect that some of tonight will be about how we work together to achieve that. And you have some wonderful speakers here this evening. The format of the evening is, of course, it will hear from the panel, and then it will be open to questions, written questions, and then questions from the audience. So without further ado, and I said my thanks to everyone I need to at the start, and there'll be more at the end, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, given that John has given us such a great introduction and really set the scene so well. Denise Sommerville was a candidate for the ALBA party in the council elections last year. It seems like a lifetime ago. It was last year, wasn't it? Because we've done so much. As we've said, this is our 57th meeting. The book was launched a year ago, and we've done as many meetings as there have been weeks in the year, but we keep going, and it's really great. Somebody had asked me online today if people do attend these meetings who are not yet persuaded or have different persuasions or not quite sure what they think? And the answer is absolutely yes. I was really privileged to be on the board of Yes Scotland between 2012 and 2014, campaigning around the country for independence in halls just like this. And I'm sure all of you were there. If you weren't campaigning, you were attending, you were listening, you were speaking to your friends and neighbours about why Scotland should be an independent country, and so she should be. And I just remember the hope that we saw in the faces of those people in 2014. That hope in many cases has turned to despair, and it is our responsibility to deliver on the promises we made to people that a better Scotland is possible with independence. So to lead us into this very positive debate on independence for Scotland, please join me in welcoming Denise Sommerville.
Thank you, everyone. What do we want?
Independence.
And when do we want it?
Now.
Good evening, Independence family and friends. Yes, you are correct, we want it now. It's an absolute pleasure to be hosting alongside three very excellent and experienced politicians with the passion and drive, along with over 7,000 members, a new party for independence, the ALBA party. When I was asked to speak tonight, I was told to talk from the heart about what an independent Scotland meant to me. This really got me thinking, as independence, like many of you before me tonight, means so many things. So I thought hard and I knew first and foremost, it's a drive for a fairer country that has the power to help build healthy, strong, vibrant communities, whether that be the towns, cities or our rural areas. Poverty is prevalent in many people's households at the moment. Many spent the winter of 2022 in misery due to the rising fuel costs, and furthermore, a cost of living crisis, a new word for recession, has hit everyone's pockets. I was so proud to stand as a candidate for the ALBA party at last year's election, and extremely proud that the ALBA party has a 5-point poverty plan written in their policy to help mitigate the impacts of poverty. I would echo Alex Salmond when I quote, "It's a political scandal and Parliament must now take bold and radical action to ensure that such inequality is no longer accepted by politicians in the Scottish Parliament." ALBA's 5-point poverty plan would see the introduction of a yearly £500 payment to 500,000 low-earning households, an increase in Scottish child payment to £40 a week to 400,000 children. Free school meals would be extended to children in both primary and secondary schools, and EMA would be doubled to £60 for 16 to 18-year-olds. Over and above all I've mentioned, the final part of the policy would be to introduce universal access to sports facilities, which would effectively reduce the children's mental health pandemic, which has arose from lockdowns. Let's break this down a bit. In the Ayr North constituency where I stood, this policy would have helped thousands of low-income families. It was reported in 2019 that South Ayrshire had the 10th highest child poverty levels in Scotland, with 26% of children classified as living in poverty after housing costs. This equates to approximately 5,242 children in South Ayrshire, and most prominent in the Ayr North and Girvan and South Carrick wards, with 36% of children within these wards experiencing poverty. The biggest threat, however, this data from South Ayrshire Council website is a few years outdated now, and currently Scotland within the UK has suffered more crises than any society should have to deal with. The biggest threat to child poverty in 2019 was the current welfare cuts and the Brexit uncertainty. If this wasn't enough of a disaster, now in 2023, on top of this, we've had a global pandemic which brought the full world to a halt for the first time in any of our lifetimes. And, as mentioned before, a cost of anything crisis, whether that be mortgage rates increase, food prices through the roof or fuel, which, may I add, has given the owners of these companies billions in profits whilst everyone else makes do with what they have. Why in 2023 do we allow this to happen where crisis creates profit? While schools in my constituency are hosting food banks, clothes banks, drop-in sessions and much more for the people of the community. The school is basically a social work hub that helps hundreds of families in the area. The head teacher is fantastic and I undoubtedly commend the work that she undertakes. However, a school should be a place of learning for children, not a social work hub for a complex and diverse community. I highlight this point as an example of how stretched services are and the mismanagement of spending within councils. Another example is a nursery in my area. Again, amazing work has been undertaken to nurture each toddler's individuality. However, the ratio of nursery nurses to children is 8:1, which I believe is quite across the board in Scotland, and the South Ayrshire Council intends to give them more. Now, come on, I have one toddler in my household creating havoc, never mind being tasked with 8. These nursery nurses and teachers are overworked, underpaid, and should be more valued for the fantastic work that they do. We need to put our people first and foremost in an independent Scotland. Too many people are falling through the cracks of society, and the safety net that's supposed to be our government is failing us. We have our new First Minister more interested in football club managers, whilst his own MSPs are saying another 25 years of devolution is a great thing, and we've gained so much from the previous 25 years, things can only get better. Strange when their own poll says independence at 53%, and there's never been a stronger time to fire that gun. The 2014 Scottish independence referendum was a political awakening for many Scots at this time, myself included. Time and time again we had been let down by previous governments, and many people in Scotland from both sides of the argument held passionate and motivated debates. It was exciting, it was fun, and all of Scotland was involved. The clear outcome was the Scottish people weren't ready for the full independence. Nearly 9 years on from the vote, and devolution has brought us nothing but crisis after crisis. I stand before you all today and say no more to devolution, no more to Westminster rule, and no more no more crisis to create profit for the few. If the Scottish Government do not act quickly on independence, it's up to the people of the Yes movement and wider afield to make a huge stand. March from Hollywood to Westminster, stopping at every major town and city on this side of the border and that side. Just a little like Wallace without the blood and the gore. Take a Scottish pound and the good old banter, make sure you bring the iron brown, the square sausage, and show the media, politicians and the people of both sides of the border that for as long as 100 of us remain alive, never will we in any condition be subjected to the lordship of the English. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honours that we are fighting, but for freedom alone, which no man, honest man or woman, gives up but with life itself. It's the people who make Scotland what it is, not the government, not the politicians, nor the Parliament. Our people will stand together and stand united in an independent Scotland and shape the country for the needs of our people to thrive in life, not struggle to survive. Thank you for listening.
Here. Thank you very much, Denise, for a speech clearly given from your heart. You, like indeed the rest of the panel here, is an absolute activist. And with that in mind, it's a real pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Corri Wilson and I had the privilege, well, it was for me, and pleasure also for me, hopefully she'll reciprocate, of serving together as one of the 56 SNP MPs who were elected in 2015. And what a moment it was when we all went down to Westminster, as we said, as we meant, to settle up, not to settle down. People expected of us that we would raise the roof in the House of Commons, we wouldn't conform to what they wanted us to do, but we would indeed stand up for Scotland. And in amongst that very disciplined group of 56, which you saw in the telly, there were some rebels amongst us, looking to use some wild, nefarious ways to bring the cause of independence to the House of Commons stage every single day. We weren't all successful in convincing all of our other fellow MPs that we should do that, but hey-ho, here we are in the ALBA party, determined to absolutely do that. In fact, I think it's fair to say I'm very proud as to what Neil Hanvey and Ken McCaskill did in walking out in the House of Commons when Boris Johnson refused to respect the will of the people of Scotland. That's what we would have done if we'd had the chance and the permission to do so. But thank you to Kenny and Neil, who I think deserve a round of applause from us all for doing that. But Corri Wilson is an activist in the true sense of the word, if there ever was one. She cares. I know she cares. She campaigns on things that matter to her, matters to her community, matters to the people of Scotland. She's a determined woman, a wonderful woman, someone who I'm proud to call my friend and privileged to have as Deputy General Secretary of the ALBA Party. Please welcome her, Corri Wilson.
Thank you, Taz. Good evening, folks. I'm absolutely delighted to be here tonight with our dedicated and hard-working South Ayrshire campaign unit hosting another We ALBA book event. Taking a moment to reflect on the past decade, I'm struck by the realisation that independence has pretty much consumed every waking moment of my life. Like many folk, though, I've sacrificed evenings, weekends, attended countless meetings, organised numerous events, door-knocked, leafleted, been at stalls and much more, all in the pursuit of bringing us closer to our ultimate goal of self-determination. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. Yet, despite our unwavering dedication, here we are, 10 plus years later, and it seems that that goal still eludes us. It's there, but just out of reach. There's no date, so folk aren't motivated to campaign. It's disheartening, isn't it? But as Roosevelt said, nothing worth having comes easy. We, as a nation and our Scottish ancestors, are the very architects of the modern world. We have been at the forefront of enlightenment, shaping the course of history. But somewhere along the way, it feels like we lost our path. We lost our belief in ourselves. That constant drip of too wee, too poor, too stupid has got into the Scottish psyche, the Scottish cringe. When you really think about it, it's actually incredible to comprehend that we as people think we're not good enough. That, I have to say, enrages me and saddens me in equal measure. Imagine believing that we're not good enough to make our own decisions. Yet, at the same time, we're a nation that others envy. With a rich tapestry of history, culture and tradition, we have always fought to have our voices heard, to determine our own destiny and to shape our own future. Time for it to happen. The recent legal opinion published suggested that the Supreme Court was mistaken in its approach to the right to self-determination. And whilst this is encouraging, independence is not merely a matter of fulfilling legal criteria or waiting on any one political party to fire a starting gun. It goes beyond that. It's about our democracy, the journey that we, you and me, undertake to reach our destination. It's about the grassroots movement, the collective will of the Scottish people to make it happen. Time and time again, when given the opportunity to vote, the people of Scotland have demonstrated their unwavering support for independence. And according to the polls, as Denise has already mentioned, support for independence is at an all-time high. This resounding affirmation reveals that our strong desire to govern ourselves, to make our own decisions and to shape our own future, that Westminster has had us over a barrel for far too long, disrespecting our country and disrespecting our people. We deserve the right to self-governance. The time for playing cat and mouse with Westminster's over. The time for meaningless words and slogans is over. Democracy should be honoured and upheld. But how do we do this? How do we turn this into reality? The answer lies within each and every one of us here. If we truly want independence, we must actively work towards it. We cannot sit idly by and hope that somebody else will do it. No, my friends, it's up to us and us alone. No one's coming to save you or our country. Here in South Ayrshire, we already have a mechanism in place for a Scotland United Front. Since 2012, South Ayrshire for Independence has been working together, cross-party and none. We've never stopped campaigning. This can and should be replicated across the country. It's imperative that we stand united if we are to succeed. Only by working together can we forge a brighter future for ourselves and our children. We're lucky to have a great political mind in Alex Salmond, the one person that I believe Westminster truly fears. But we have a part to play as well. Only you can mobilise the groundswell and demonstrate our readiness to create a better tomorrow, not just for us, but for the generations to come. By giving up your precious time and investing in the local campaign, however big or small that commitment is, you will influence the outcome. So please do get involved. So my fellow nationalists, let our resounding message echo through the weeks and months ahead. We will not be silenced, we will not be deterred, and we will not rest until the flames of independence burn brightly, illuminating a future where Scotland stands tall and free. Thank you.
I'm going to afford Alex just a minute or so to make his way down while I give him his introduction, and that really is to say that, as I mentioned, this is the 57th Wee ALBA book meeting, and I'm sure I'm not wrong in saying that since we launched just about a year ago this Wee ALBA book, which is the case, the new case for an independent Scotland, Alex has been at almost every single one of those meetings. That is one meeting per week in the past year. That is commitment to independence. Now, it just came to me, and I was just Googling to make sure I had it correct, the name Rest and Be Thankful. I don't quite know why, but then I was right in saying it is a very famous, distinct mountain pass where people would rest and be thankful for having reached the top of their climb. And I suppose it's poignant tonight because this man will not rest or be thankful until he takes his country to the top of our climb to reach independence. Please welcome Alex Salmond.
Thank you very much, Tasmina and friends. I was just thinking about being back in Ayrshire, and I was listening to what Denise had to say, and she recited some very famous lines that virtually everybody in Scotland will remember. As long as 100 of us remain alive, we'll never be subject to the lordship of the English. It's not for glory or riches or honours that we are fighting, but for freedom alone, which no good man lays down but with life itself. Now, what, apart from Denise reciting these famous lines, is the connection between that and Ayrshire? Any ideas? Robert Burns, most certainly. Ayrshire is a fundamentally greedy part of Scotland. Not only did it produce the national bard, albeit that he was heavily influenced by his Aberdeenshire father, but also it produced Bernard of Kilwinning, a mere 10 miles to the north of where we are this evening, who of course wrote the Declaration of Arbroath, which Denise was quoting from. So for 700 years and more, these lines have echoed through Scottish history. So if it wasn't done in Ayrshire, it's no worth a damn in terms of the future of Scotland. Now, a lot of people, and there's some references tonight already, are a bit leery about Scotland's prospects and position at the present moment. They wonder, has the national movement lost its way? Has it lost its mojo? The London commentators, incidentally, are in no doubt whatsoever. You can see these smiles starting to reset in their faces as they speak about Scotland. In fact, they are probably right now more relaxed about Scotland than at any time since before the great Madame Écosse won the Hamilton by-election in 1967. I was watching some of the newsreel reports in tribute to Winnie last week, and it was quite interesting seeing the ones about Hamilton. You know, they said they were showing some of the newsreels of the accounts of the Hamilton by-election before the result, and they were saying, well, because Labour under pressure, Labour government's very unpopular, the Conservatives are putting up a strong challenge in Hamilton, and there's some Scottish nationalist person as well. And then, of course, as the day grew closer, the newsreel emphasis started to change, and then, of course, after the result, it was a total and absolute sensation. And Winnie, of course, represented something different. MPs from Scotland were by and large either Tory lairds or were worthy, but pretty dull, trade unionists from the Labour Party who'd probably seen better days in terms of their campaigning through their lives and were excellent people, no doubt. But it was kind of set in a pattern. Winnie was something quite different. She was a thoroughly modern young woman with ideas that expressed something of the hope and optimism and social mobility of the 1960s and brought that in to a cause which had hitherto been seen as something which looked backwards, not looked forwards. Winnie was all about looking forwards. Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on. And then in her later career, internationalising the cause of Scottish independence by a single-handed representation in the councils of Europe. Our First Minister has had a bit of a setback this evening, which you probably wouldn't have heard of. He had one of his announcements on Saturday. He was going to appoint a special envoy to the European Union. And the European Union tonight has said through diplomatic sources that, of course, they won't be able to speak to this special envoy because they have to speak diplomatically through the UK government. Kind of obvious, incidentally. Something you might want to check before you made the announcement, I suppose. Something that will be ridiculed and will add to the ridicule of the London newspapers. Of course, we might reflect, when you had people like Winnie Ewing on your side, you didn't need to appoint any envoy. You had a one-woman diplomat who represented the influence and prestige and brought Scotland to the international arena. Not just in Europe, but through the Lomé Convention, through the Erasmus Project, and to a European, continental and worldwide audience. So the cause of Scottish nationalism changed fundamentally then, and since then, more or less, London has been worried. Sometimes really scared, sometimes a wee bit scared. But basically since then, London has been concerned. Now they're laughing. They're laughing at Scotland because they think Scotland should be represented through the prism of the Scottish National Party, which is obviously going through some very difficult times indeed. I think they're wrong. And I think we'll be able to demonstrate them to be wrong pretty quickly. The most important reason I think they're wrong is when Winnie was winning Hamilton, or indeed 10 years ago when I was First Minister, support for the SNP either in a by-election or in terms of the opinion polls was very high. It was 50% 10 years ago. But support for Scottish independence, our fundamental aim, was at 30%, or actually less. I remember very well in 2012 when I signed the Edinburgh Agreement with David Cameron. I had the whole thing nicely set up. You know, I had David facing a yellow map just to remind them that every single constituency seat in the Scottish Parliament was held by a Scottish nationalist, where I was just facing him. There was a crowd outside. I suggested to him that he might like to leave through the back door because we didn't want any breaches of the peace or disturbances. The whole thing was going absolutely swimmingly. And then I got news of a YouGov poll showing independence at 28%. Rather inconvenient for the day, I felt. But nonetheless, I was also confident that when we joined the argument, when we, for the first time, brought Scotland to a point of decision and debate and discussion, then that 28% would rise. And rise it did. Now, we didn't get to where we wanted to be. Maybe, incidentally, we peaked that week too early. And I'd hoped it would be upon them and through them like Bannockburn before they realised the calamity they were facing. But they woke up in the last week and the support drew back as the weight of the establishment was brought to bear. But nonetheless, you can measure political success and failure in many ways. But if you bring about a transformation in people's attitudes to independence in Scotland, then in some senses that represents a victory. A victory not because it achieves it on the day, but it sets in the psyche the conditions for victory in the future. And the reason I'm confident, more confident than I was 10 years ago, that that's the way and direction that Scotland is going, is that while support from the SNP has suffered somewhere in the 30s, support for independence is at 50% or more in many of the opinion surveys. So we see an exact reversal of the position from way back in history, or indeed from 10 years ago. For the first time in modern Scottish politics, support for the concept of independence is higher, much higher, than support for the main party of independence and the Scottish Government, the Scottish National Party. And if we address that point collectively as a movement, then we can solve that puzzle and we can wipe the smiles and laughs off the faces of the London commentators and politicians. So how do you do it? Well, obviously, the next electoral test in Scotland is next year's general election. Getting to independence through the referendum route has been closed. I mean, last year I warned and I suggested that going to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom was not the most sensible political strategy I'd ever seen in my puff. Neil Hanvey actually, I thought, expressed it very well in an article in the national newspaper last week when he described it as perhaps the most inexplicable political manoeuvre, or that James IV's fatal charge at Flodden in 1513, in contrast, looked like a sensible military manoeuvre. Why? Well, not wisdom after the event, it's just logic. Do you actually go to the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom for advice on how to dissolve the United Kingdom and therefore the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom? Your Honour, please tell us in our pleadings how we can dissolve your court. Even if it had been a liberal, decent, honourable judge like Lady Hale, who turned over the government on Boris Johnson's attempts to lie to Her Majesty the Queen and use up. I mean, I'll tell you, Boris Johnson was a Democrat. He didn't mind who he lied to. You know, Prince and Pauper, the Queen and the people, he lied to everybody equally. Whatever else you might say about him, he drew no distinction of rank in who he's lying to. He lies to everybody. So Lady Hale overturned his decision. But, I mean, Lord Reid, you kidding me? Because you can add to what I've just said, you, Your Honour, as a distinguished Scottish judge who's risen to be President of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, we're asking not only to dissolve the court, but to dissolve your position within it. Yeah, fat chance. So it wasn't a great idea. It just wasn't. But once you've received the rebuff, the knockback, then you've got to use it to your political advantage. Firstly, because, you know, the ALBA party, Neil Hanvey, published a legal opinion from Professor McCorquodale, Robert McCorquodale, the United Nations' favourite international lawyer. This is the guy who's advised the Baltic states, advised recently the Chagos Islanders, whose support now is complete, virtually, in the United Nations. I think there were 5 countries left supporting the United Kingdom in their disgraceful behaviour towards these islanders. But Australia had a general election. I think there's only 4 now. You know, 200-odd countries in the United Nations, and the United Kingdom has the support of 4 in terms of its attitude and behaviour towards the Chagos Islanders. Robert McCorquodale represents the Chagos Islanders. So when Robert McCorquodale says, look, you don't need to accept the Supreme Court's judgment. There are other ways to express your sovereignty. The Supreme Court is wrong in international law. Then he knows exactly what he's talking about. And of course, it's a very learned judgment, because you don't have to read it to understand it in terms of the common sense position of Scotland. Because if you go into the streets of Troon or the streets of Kilwinning or the streets of anywhere in Ayrshire or Scotland and say, look, is Scotland a real nation? Folk will go, yeah. Does a nation have the right of self-determination? They'll say, yeah. Therefore, does Scotland have the right of self-determination? They'll say, so yes, absolutely. Because if that was the argument, as opposed to whether you should exercise it for independence, then it's not 50-50, it's 9-1. And all Robert McCorquodale is doing is putting into international legal terms and demolishing the Supreme Court's argument as to why self-determination is the right of any nation. And it ain't good enough to say, you've got self-determination, but we'll just deny you the means of expressing it. If that had held in international law, the United Nations would not have grown from 50 states in 1945 to nearly 200 today. There are very, very few of the predecessor states who thought it was a great idea for countries to become independent. Mikhail Gorbachev, a liberal, enlightened leader of the Soviet Union, did not think it was a great idea that the Baltic states became independent. But he, like all the others, had to bow to history and to law and to international due process. So it clarifies for Scotland, if we can't have a referendum because of the venture to the Supreme Court, then how else do you express your sovereignty and your wishes? And the answer is it's done through an election, through a general election or a Scottish election. Not one election, incidentally, but each and every election. Because democracy is not a static thing. It's a thing that flows and changes over time. Why should this not be a surprise to people? Because before the advent of the Scottish Parliament, this was the accepted way. Even Harold Wilson, after he'd recovered from the shock of Winnie Ewing winning Hamilton, said, yeah, of course, if Scots vote by majority for the SNP for independence, then Westminster would accept it. Margaret Thatcher, Lady Thatcher, the greatest opponent of Scottish nationalism in living memory, in her memoirs, The Downing Street Years, said if the Scots are an ancient nation, if they determine on independence, no English politician, certainly not myself, should gainsay the process. So that was the accepted route. Then we have to re-establish it as the route. If you're choosing a first-past-the-post Westminster election to be the test of Scottish independence or the next test, then you've got to play it with your head. And in a time where the SNP support is going down but independence support's high, it might be a good idea to emphasise the principle of independence and downplay the party politic aspect of the independence vote. That's the genesis and the idea behind the Scotland United approach to the general election. One candidate in each seat around Scotland, backed by the independence parties, ALBA, the SNP, the Greens, the Scottish Socialists, perhaps even an independent candidate or two. I can think of one. She stars in Two Doors Down, my favourite television programme. A fantastic, wonderful television programme. One of the greatest comedic talents that Scotland has seen in the last generation, but also a great political talent is Elaine Seasmith. She'd be, if she could be persuaded, an excellent person to put forward under the Scotland United for Independence banner. Now, the vast majority, and this is what I don't understand with the attitude of the SNP leadership, the vast majority of these candidates, all of the sitting SNP MPs who would be readopted, would be the candidate in their seat. That's obvious. You don't take away an existing parliamentarian. So they would be SNP, Scotland United for Independence. The two ALBA MPs would be Scotland United for Independence. You divide the other 8 to 10 seats that are held by the unionist parties among the parties taking part in such a coalition. Nobody loses out of this, but Scotland could gain. And at a stroke, instead of having the London commentators speculate and giggle about how many seats Sir Keir Starmer is going to win in Scotland, is it going to be 10, 15, 20, 25, and how that will be the death knell for the SNP and for Scottish aspirations, at a stroke, you would change the election to be how many of the 10 remaining unionist seats would remain in unionist hands if the Scotland United for Independence coalition can mobilise the 50% and bring it to bear at the ballot box. It's an idea which is right for its time. And despite the less than boiling point reaction from the SNP leadership at the present moment, I know because they've contacted me, a good number of individual SNP MPs think it's an idea which should certainly be discussed over this summer. And then perhaps if the party, the SNP, goes back to its origins and has a vote on the matter, you might be surprised to see how much support there is among the ordinary party membership. See, I listened to Hamza Yousaf's speech on Saturday, and I thought I understood what it was about, but it's subsequently been reinterpreted and then reinterpreted again. But I was interested in Leslie Riddick's comments immediately afterwards, which he just said gently to the people gathered in the Caird Hall, look, there are people also gathered at Bannockburn today. More people than are here in this hall. They are part of the national movement. They need to be treated with respect. And then she's more gently said, look, and I remember when SNP conferences had votes and motions and democracy. I think if that is what happens between now and October, you will be surprised by the number of people within the ranks of the Scottish National Party say, yeah, if ever there was a time to try this idea, it is now. Rather than attempt to salvage as many scalps as possible, rather than let the most boring opposition leader in living memory have seats fall into his lap, let's try something that would mobilise the majority in Scotland's benefit next year. You know, Keir Starmer, I mean, people call him a red Tory. I mean, I don't know where they get the red bit from. I mean, I've never seen I mean, you know, people normally in politics, not myself, of course, I was different, but other folk in politics usually wait till they're in office before they tear up their commitments. You know, Keir Starmer does it before he gets there. It's unbelievable. I mean, good, this man makes Tony Blair look like a left winger. He's extraordinary. And yet he thinks all I have to do, in fact, he's probably right, because as soon as he speaks, he gets into trouble like he did on oil and gas last week. But maybe he should say nothing at all and just let the Tories give him so many seats in England and the SNP give him so many seats in Scotland. But there is a different perspective for the election. And that perspective should be to assert Scotland's claim of sovereignty and freedom. So we'll put forward the idea, and we owe it to the national movement to keep putting it forward. I'll put it forward all summer in meetings such as this, and I'll appeal to people to think, to calculate. Even if it's done for self-surviving motives. I mean, Dr. Johnson once said that the thought of being hanged in 2 weeks' time used to concentrate the mind wonderfully. Perhaps the minds will be concentrated wonderfully. I mean, I don't think those who are about to die should just salute. I don't think people should polish their CVs. I think they should work out how to keep nationalist MPs representing Scotland and not open the door for unionists. It's not an unreasonable proposition. And that is the proposition we're putting forward. Two other things need to be done. And one won't have immediate effect because Hamza's not in control of it. And that is the clouds hanging over the SNP are going to hang over the SNP for some time. It's not going to be over by Christmas. So he can't really do anything about that. But what he can do is clean up some of the mess of the policy programme. When I became First Minister, my colleagues and I had a duty as we believed it. We had to run the Scottish Parliament in such a fashion that people had never seen before, so that nobody could question our ability to run the shop. And it worked. In 2014, the no side in the campaign said all sorts of things about the independence. You know, independence, food prices would rise uncontrollably. Well, that was a good one, wasn't it? That Scotland would float off to the North Pole, that nobody would speak to us anymore, that if we voted for independence, then we'd certainly be out of the European community. That was another good one, wasn't it? But all of the scare stories, the fears, the smears, the attempts to blackmail and to threaten and to lie to people and to intimidate them. Nobody once said in the entire campaign that the SNP can't run the Scottish Parliament, because if they'd said that, they'd been laughed at. It was a strong card for the yes policy, for the yes movement in that campaign. And he has to get back to that. He has to clear away. Look, there are subjects and which have to be tackled because they're about fairness and equality and they're absolutely fundamental. Equal marriage is one of these. You might say I took a risk in introducing it in 2011. But I thought it was the right thing to do, and I also knew that it didn't prejudice anybody else's rights. And therefore, when it was done, it would be done, discussed and debated in a proper manner, and then done, and would be glad of it. But there are other subjects which you cannot say are going to go. I mean, no society in Western Europe has resolved the debate on self-identification. And if Scotland thinks it's going to resolve it, perhaps the time might be after we get to independence and we can resolve it for ourselves. There are other matters. I mean, you don't say, I mean, look, I represented a fishing community for 25 years. There's still a fishing community in this part of Scotland. Nobody in a fishing community believes that the way to conservation is to have an arbitrary closure of sea areas. All you do is take the people who are fishing that area and you move them into somebody else's area. You displace their effort. You don't reduce the effort. You don't do it that way. There's other ways to reduce effort. But to actually say to people, look, we've decided to introduce this because we've signed a Butte House agreement, and all you're going to talk about is where we do it, not if we do it, you know, is not the way to command the support of the coastal communities of Scotland. You know, people who, since the days of Winnie Ewing, have fundamentally looked to the national movement for their protection and their support. We have a fine member of Parliament, fine nationalist, in Angus Brendan McNeill, from the Hill na Nia, the Western Islands. How do you think he feels when he's talking to his constituents about ferries at the present moment? What exactly is he meant to say to people? Now, Angus, knowing Angus, I mean, I used to say about Angus, you'd fling him in the mince, you'd come out dry. No doubt he'll find a way, but he's been put in a sticky wicket, to say the least. We have to sweep away. And my advice to Hamza Yousaf is to get back to a policy programme that emphasises health, education and transport, runs the shop efficiently, and have no one say that you are wasting a pound of their money, never mind tens of millions. Let the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and all these vipers scrape around for rubbish. Don't present them with your head on a pallet. And the third thing is this, and something which ALBA have been trying to contribute to through the Wee ALBA book in these meetings. The world of 2023 is not the world of 2014. There has been changes in the world environment, many of them for the worse. And we have to update our independence perspective and prospectus for these changes. The most obvious, most devastating one is Brexit. Yes, of course, Brexit is a reason for Scotland being independent. Of course it is. Just like the Iraq War was a reason for Scotland being independent. But all of these people who said you've got the most powerful devolved parliament in the world, we don't incidentally, but that's what they said. Yeah, but we can't stop children dying in Iraq or being part of the extermination of hundreds of thousands of people. So independence gives you the freedom not to take part in illegal conflicts. So Brexit, of course, is an argument for independence because independence, not devolution, gives you the ability to say, no, we quite like being part of this European single market. We believe in the ideals of Europe, and we want to continue our part within it. The case that Winnie Ewing took to the SNP all these years ago and carried it. But you have to recognise the fact that it happened. Brexit is a reality. And despite the great support that there is for the case of Scotland and sympathy across Europe, it's 5 years to get back in. Now, I want you to all imagine that you're the First Minister of Scotland in a few years' time, maybe a few months' time, and you're negotiating independence with Keir Starmer in a meeting at Hexham. If it was me, I'd have it beside the races, but no, it's not. It's been done before. A good precedence for Scotland had Hexham, right? And Keir Starmer says to you as First Minister of Scotland, he says, what's your trading policy going to be? And you say back to him, we're going to join the European Union. And in 5 years' time, we'll be full members and have access to the whole single market. And he'll say, yeah, but what's your trading policy going to be next month? Or next year? Or over the next 5 years till you get there? And there is no answer if all you're saying is we're going to rejoin the European Union. So you've got two choices at that point. Either you can pack up your bags and say, oh, we never thought of that. Or alternatively, you can think about it beforehand, because luckily for us, luckily for Scotland, luckily for you as First Minister doing the negotiations, there is an option. It's called something called the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. Has 4 countries in it: Norway, Switzerland, Iceland and Liechtenstein. Now, being a member of EFTA doesn't guarantee you international success, although I should mention that all 4 of these countries are in the top 10 in the world, wealth per head, so it can't be too bad a place to be. But what it does is provide you with a means of joining that organisation in weeks, not years, and a route into the single market in an accelerated timescale. So instead of not being able to answer yes or no the Keir Starmer question, you'll be able to say, we're joining EFTA, it's coming up at the next meeting, we're going into the single market, what are you doing? In other words, we have to adapt our policy to be a policy that withstands the negotiations which we want to get into. Because the real point about the Yes Alliance, about Scotland United for Independence, is that every party and every person being part of that alliance should stand on a clear manifesto commitment. Not one to be said and then reinterpreted by briefing and reinterpreted the next day, and we didn't quite mean this or didn't quite mean that, but unambiguous. We're seeking a mandate from the people to initiate negotiations with Westminster. And we have a plan and a strategy and a policy backed by domestic agitation and demonstration, by a Scottish Constitutional Convention, and by appeals to the international community, rock solid in international law, to have that mandate recognised. An unambiguous appeal to the people to use that ballot box opportunity to demonstrate that the words from the Declaration of Arbroath are still alive here in Ayrshire today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to Alex and all of our speakers. And we now move to questions. I have some written questions in here which we'll begin with, and then we can move to questions from the floor. The first question is from Alan Moffat, who wishes his name to be read out but asks for me to ask the question, which I'm happy to do. Alan's question is, what would bring about unification? I was going to say reunification, but unification in the Yes movement, including the SNP. Corri, I think I'm going to ask you that question first, because I know how important it is to you and how much you do it every Saturday morning to do that. Corri.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, as I alluded to earlier, in South Ayrshire, we have been working in unity since 2012. South Ayrshire for Independence, and there's many people here that are part of that, have constantly campaigned, and there is people in that group who are SNP members, who are Green members, who are no political party at all, who are part of Commonweal. We did at one point even have a Tory person, but I haven't seen him for a while. But yeah, so we have worked very successfully together. And the reason that we do that is that we recognise that the goal of independence is more important than political priorities or policies. And we are adult and grown up enough to agree that we don't all agree with what different political parties have or what policies are out there. But without us working together, we're not going to achieve our goal at the end of the day. And in actual fact, it really works to our advantage when we are on the street stalls. We just had a big stall at the Holy Fair there on Saturday. And when people come along and automatically make an assumption that, oh, this is just the SNP, and you can say, well, they're not an SNP and neither are they, and they're not in a political party. And it kind of takes them back a wee bit and lets people just sort of have a think about how we campaign and how we go forward. So I would absolutely say that it is a working model. It has worked very successfully for us, and I hope it continues to work very successfully because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is independence, and unless we all get our heads together, our sleeves rolled up and get out there into our communities and show unity, we're not going to achieve independence.
Thank you, Corri. Denise, I'm going to come to you. The idea that there isn't unification in the Yes movement is something we should think about for a moment and ask, well, is that actually the case? Because if you marched at Bannockburn or marched in Glasgow, you would think there is unification in the Yes movement. Then you think about who stands to gain most by suggesting to the Yes movement that there's no unification in the Yes movement. And the answer is the unionists. Yes. So we should be very careful not to fall into traps that sometimes social media lay for us where we think perhaps people aren't prepared to work together. Because I don't think that's us saying that. I think it's those who stand to lose most from independence who are saying that. And with that, Denise, I'm going to ask you the question. Well, first of all, do you agree with what I'm suggesting? And secondly, what can we do to get rid of this attitude that exists that there is not unification amongst us?
Well, I do agree with you, Taz, that there is unification within the Yes movement, and I do agree that there's only one party that tends to gain from this, which is unionists, and they seem to be doing the unionist job for them at the moment by not agreeing to work with everyone else within the wider Yes movement. Obviously, at the weekend we had the march at Bannockburn at Glasgow. There'll be one in here next month, and these show how unified Scotland is for independence. And I don't know where I'm going with that. That's on you go.
Well, no, thank you. Well, you agreed with me. It's a good start, Denise. It's a good start.
Well, I can't disagree.
Alex, I wonder if I could just take you a stage further on this question about unification. I think you've said all of your remarks and your barnstorming speech there would indicate that the goal of independence and how easily it can actually be achieved if we get our act together at this moment in time, and this is the moment in time to do it, it can be achieved. Perhaps that's what will bring about unification. So I want to hear from you that, and actually if I can take you a stage further on what Scotland United means. Does that mean in 2024 we can look forward to either Prime Minister Starmer or wee Rishi Sunak, whoever it might be, sitting looking at a flag of Scotland, a map of Scotland where it's saltires all over the place as a Scotland United that they're going to have to face? What happens then if we win?
Well, if it's won, it would be won on the manifesto commitment to initiate independence negotiations with Westminster. And then you say, well, what happens if Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak says, we don't want to negotiate with you? That's when you formulate your constitutional convention, you move to popular demonstration in Scotland, you move to the international community for support. I mean, the Declaration of Arbroath, which was being cited in 1320, was exactly that. The Declaration of Arbroath was a letter to Pope John the 22nd to say, look, we have won Scotland in the field of battle in 1320, but these days in the field of electoral politics, and we are seeking your recognition as the world authority for our independence. Note, incidentally, the Declaration of Arbroath was written after the battle had been secured at home. You know, that's the moment to ask for international recognition when you've won and have the mandate and have the democratic authority to do so. So both the combination of domestic action and international action. Now people say, oh, well, will that work? Well, you know, it's kind of worked for lots of countries in the recent past. Lots and lots of countries. I mean, there's very, very few examples, as I was saying earlier, of the predecessor state saying, well, that's it. You know, the game's a bogey, here's your independence. There's one or two, but not very many. Virtually every country had to move democratically, and because there's an international world order of legality, then you're in a strong position to do it. But that's what you have to do. That's the approach you have to make. You have to indicate that when you say something, you mean it. Not to be reinterpreted or equivocated or to have some clever sentence put in it somewhere. You have to appeal for a mandate and say that's the mandate we're appealing for. We're appealing at the ballot box because that's democracy, and then we intend to enforce it by peaceful, democratic means domestically and internationally. And if you do that, you will rally people behind you. You'll rally the people who voted for you, obviously, but there's lots of people who didn't vote for you who will say, well, you know, that's democracy. Lots of people think like that. There actually are comparatively few people who say, well, I'm going to ignore the results of elections. You'll see plenty of it online, of course, but not in the real world. You have more confidence in our fellow Scots that they'll accept a democratic verdict. So that's the principle you put forward. That's the strategy. You have to back it up. You have to answer the question of what do you do when Westminster says no. You don't take no for an answer. You continue that campaign through the Constitutional Convention to make clear domestically and internationally you're not having it, you're not accepting it. And that will lay the United Kingdom low. Don't underrate how little power the UK has in the councils of the world now. I mean, the Chagos Islanders is an example. You know, a generation ago it would be unthinkable for the UK to be humiliated in the United Nations. Now they have very few friends left, and after Brexit they've even fewer friends left. I mean, you're dealing, you can count them out taking your shoes off. That's the reality now, and therefore it's not. You know, nobody's claiming these things are easy or simple, but it is by no means impossible, as countries after country has demonstrated. What it takes and what is indispensable, what you have to have, is political resolve, resolution and leadership. These things are necessary. But right now in Scotland, as far as I can see, we're in a position where there's plenty of people just waiting for that resolution and waiting to see it. You know, the cause of Scotland has not been overburdened by action over these last 8 years. And therefore, it would be a refreshing change to see mandates backed up and backed up by affirmative action.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex. The next question is from Dean, who's happy for his name to be read out and that I ask the question. The question is, what is your position on the importance of an independent Scotland having our own sovereign currency? So I don't know who would like to go first on this. Corri, I do know we've certainly passed the resolution conference.
I think I sometimes take a wee bit of a different position when we start talking about different things, whether it's pensions or whether it's currency, because my fear sometimes is that we get tied up in knots having to answer all these questions of what if, what's it going to look like, what are we going to do, when in actual fact, if we even look within the last 10 years what has changed across the political spectrum, it's impossible to be able to say that this is what we would do and this is what we wouldn't do. And sometimes I think, for me, it is more about what is the actual vision of an independent Scotland and having the power to make the decisions that are best for the country and for the people at the time, whether that is about currency, whether that is about pensions. And we've seen, again, if we look at the Scotland United thing, we've seen a lot of different groups, people that have got better political, economic minds than me, that have looked at different options for currency. And I think that is discussions that we have to have as a movement. We have to look at what the options are, and prepare ourselves going forward. But I do worry that we should not be tying ourselves into this is what we're going to do, because things are moving at a huge rate, and I don't think we should tie ourselves in knots.
Thanks, Corri. Alex, you know, currency was a big question in 2014, although we were told we couldn't have it. They had to concede in that BBC debate that, of course, we could indeed use sterling. No one could prevent us from doing so. What is your view on the importance of us having our own currency? And does anybody want sterling anymore anyway, perhaps?
Well, that's exactly the point has been. You know, when Alistair Darling finally conceded that, yes, Scotland could, of course, use sterling if we wished, because it was an international tradable currency, then that was a major hole in the scaremongering campaign in the BBC debate. But, I mean, I took Europe as an example of how the world had changed since 2014. I could equally have taken sterling and the currency. And I would say that the logic, economic logic now would dictate that you move to a Scottish currency as quickly as possible. And if you want an answer in 2 words for that being the case, it's Andrew Bailey. Who's Andrew Bailey? He's Governor of the Bank of England. Now, anybody with a mortgage, anybody running a business, will know the economic consequences of Andrew Bailey. This is the classic one-club golfer. Somebody couldn't forecast inflation. I mean, the Bank of England forecasts are a joke. And now, of course, in a panic, has set off on an interest rate ratchet of 13 rises in interest rates to reach 5%. You're lucky to get a mortgage at 7% now. You're lucky to get borrowing on your business at 10%. And various credit cards are probably, I don't know, I certainly wouldn't be having one now if you can possibly avoid it, let's put it that way. Money lenders would give you a better deal than a credit card at the present moment. So people's homes, assets, businesses, lives are being wrecked on the altar of Andrew Bailey. Now, Andrew Bailey, I'm sure he's a really wonderful guy, but there was an old saying during the financial crash of 2009-10. What was the difference between Andy Thornby, who was the head of the Bank of Scotland, Fred Goodwin, who was the head of the Royal Bank of Scotland, and Terry Wogan? Who was the odd man out? Well, the odd man out was Terry Wogan, because he was the only one with a banking qualification of the 3. And right now we have a governor of the Bank of England who did his thesis on the impact of the Napoleonic Wars in the cotton industry of Lancashire, because he doesn't have an economic qualification. So the Bank of England governor, in whose hands we have bequeathed the future of your mortgage, your business, your house, your family, your future, who doesn't have an economics qualification. Of course, overseen by somebody of the magnificent brilliance of Jeremy Hunt, whose unfortunate name has got him into trouble more than once or twice, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, a man who has striven gallantly and risen from the depths of poverty as a millionaire into his present position as a billionaire. Actually, I don't know if Rishi Sunak's ever heard of a mortgage, certainly not in his family circumstances. I bet you that the Sunaks have never had a mortgage to buy a house. I can bet you that, unless it was for some tax evasion purpose. So, I really do think that circumstances have changed. They've changed in substantial economic terms, because in 2014 we were looking forward to Scotland and the rest of the UK being partners in the European Union. The European Union would have welcomed Scotland with open arms, but the one thing that might have changed that welcome is if we said we're introducing another currency into the trading bloc. I think our welcome might have been slightly less enthusiastic than it would have been otherwise. But Brexit's happened, and we need to, I mean, the rest of the world's getting out of sterling as quick as they can. Why should we be different? So you can use sterling for assets. If anybody wants to keep their assets in sterling, they can do so. They can keep their pensions in sterling if they want to. But we should get our own currency, and it should be run at a reasonable level of interest rates. And you should use the ability that gives you to control the economy to make sure that you don't have a governor of a Scottish central bank who ever appears in front of a Scottish parliamentary committee and can't remember what his salary is because he's getting paid too much, and then says the solution to the economic problems of the country is for hard-pressed working people to accept less money. We can be short of all of that.
Can I ask the lovely Indie Live boys, young gentlemen, do we have till 9:30 or do we have a few minutes beyond that? We can go beyond that there, that's why we love them so much. Thank you so much. It means I can take all the written questions, hopefully squeeze some questions from the floor. Dave Russell has a question. Some of these I think you've already covered in your opening remarks, but we'll have brevity will carry a premium in your responses panel. Denise, I'll come to you first. Question from Dave. Which constituencies will ALBA field candidates in next year's general election? And you're going to remember what we agreed at Spring Conference because you were listening to every moment of that motion.
I wasn't at
You weren't at Spring Conference. Corri Wilson, redeem us. What's the plan for General Election 24? Do we have one yet, or are we perhaps waiting for circumstances?
Again, mostly following on from what I said earlier about a moving feast, what we discussed was the fact that it would probably be a bit silly to be putting a plan in place right now in terms of what the next election would look like. So that is something that obviously our LACUs and our NEC and all the members will be involved in that decision making going forward in terms of what is the right number, what is the right constituency, what does that look like, are we doing a Scotland United, is that not happening? So once we know a date and once we know what that's going to look like and what people or other parties and other people within the Yes movement are willing to be involved in, then that's in my opinion when the planning should take place.
Thank you, Corri. I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that, Alex. I mean, you already said in your opening remarks and you're quite keen on the SNP party, which you remember and led in the membership having a say, certainly in what's been suggested by us and supported by many in their own party, and give some time and space for that to be considered.
Yes, I mean, the formal position is that the SNP have a conference in October. Hopefully somebody will put forward the idea of standing as Scotland United. The ALBA party have an obligation to have our plan ready for our conference in October. If it was a Scotland United, we'd stand in our 2 existing seats and perhaps another 2 from the 10 that are in Unionist hands. If the Scotland United plan is rejected, we'll be standing in a lot more than that. And of course, these things are, as Corri rightly says, a movable feast. In the last few minutes, Douglas Chapman has announced he's not standing again. And I want you to think about that because Douglas, I've known for many years, is one of the most upstanding, decent, loyal Scottish nationalists I've ever met. He's a Member of Parliament for Dunfermline. And I don't think he's not standing again because he's frightened of a contest with Labour. He's not standing again because he doesn't have confidence in the policy of the SNP as regards the election, and also perhaps that internal machinations in the party think that removing one of their best MPs is a sensible thing to do when they've got Labour at the gates. But Douglas can speak for himself, of course, but obviously in the absence of a Scotland United coalition, which is the right way to fight the elections, we'd have to look at the canvas of seats in which we'll stand. ALBA's target, our fundamental target, is the elections of 2026 in Scotland, because as everybody in this hall knows, that the PR election allows the best opportunity for an emergent party, because you can stand in a list vote, which is not a first-past-the-post election, and therefore you don't damage other nationalist candidates. You actually add to the nationalist total by a presence on the list vote. That's our fundamental target. That's where I expect us to have a minimum of 15% of the vote and 24 MSPs in the next Scottish Parliament. The Westminster election we will stand in. How many seats we stand in depends on whether the Scotland United proposition is accepted. It would be a good thing for Scotland if it was accepted.
Thank you, Alex. A rather different tack now, some of which you covered again in your opening remarks. I'm going to come to you for this in 2 parts, this question from Sheila. It's what is ALBA's stance on the LGBT question? I'm not sure specifically what question, perhaps just a general answer about our standing behind, of course, equality for all. And what plans do you have to take us forward to independence, which perhaps Sheila asked before she's heard from you so articulately this evening, but in case there was anything else to add to that element. Thank you.
ALBA's in favour of equality and human rights for all. I was the first minister who introduced equal marriage. You have to, obviously, when you're embracing change in equality, you have to make it clear you're not doing it in a way that impinges the rights of other people in society. And the debate on self-identification has not resolved that issue in the slightest. And it has divided Scottish opinion very regrettably. ALBA stands for equality and everybody's equal rights before the law. And we also stand for everybody having rights before the law. And we'll have no truck with abolishing juries for certain charges. The jury system is the one central, unimpeachable part of any justice system in any country in the world. Any country which tampers with a jury system has serious questions to answer. And Scotland should not join the litany of countries which have gone down that sad approach. So equality before the law, equal rights for all. I think I demonstrated that as First Minister and would demonstrate it as a political party. As far as getting to independence is concerned, right, work out a strategy, agree the strategy, implement it, make it clear so as the people understand, and you'll find that 50% of people who support independence are waiting to be led in a clear, unambiguous fashion. And whatever you say, then mean it. Do exactly what you've said on the tin of an election campaign.
Thank you. Final question. Again, Alex, I'm going to come to you. And you'll understand why when I read it out, because of the legislation you passed when you were First Minister. From Edward, what solutions can you suggest to the issue of sectarianism in Scotland?
Well, it is a long time ago. I went to see Cardinal Winning. Thomas Winning was one of the greatest church people that Scotland has ever produced. Many controversial views, of course, not all of which I agreed with, of course, but then that shouldn't really matter in many ways. But he was one of the few church people who had the guts and the gumption to stand up to Margaret Thatcher, and as a result, he passed quite a few tests in my particular book. Anyway, I was very concerned about sectarianism in society after the Monklands by-election. And I went to see Tom at the Archdiocese in Glasgow, and Tom served me up spaghetti with a tomato sauce. I don't think he cooked it himself, but he certainly served it himself, which was a great matter of humility for an archbishop and cardinal. Anyway, I said to him, look, I'm really upset about this by-election. You know, it's been pretty rough, and I don't really want to be involved in a political system which has sectarian overtones. I defended, of course, the SNP because I knew the SNP were not guilty of anything of that light, and I was the party leader, so I knew it. Anyway, Tom looked at me and said, I don't know what you're worried about. He said, Alec, I was a parish priest in Lanarkshire in the 1960s, and it was much, much worse then than it is now. And in terms of what you should do, I don't think you should retire from politics. What I think you should do is write for Flourish, my monthly magazine. Of course, I won't pay you at all. I shall give you a fee to the poor. But by your deeds, you'll be known. So I think from Tom, I learned two things. One was that we should put matters into some sort of hopeful context. Sectarianism in Scotland is on the decline. Institutional sectarianism has declined substantially. It still exists, but it's on the decline and the wane. When I introduced the Act of Offensive Language, Sectarian Language, I thought it was actually good legislation. And I actually thought it was cleaning up the Act. And I know that it was unpopular with many football fans, and I managed to unite some elements of Glasgow Rangers and Celtic Football Club together in opposition to my legislation. which of course was my secret plan all along. I wanted them to see it from the other person's point of view. But I thought it was good legislation because, you see, I didn't feel that people had the right, and, I believe absolutely in freedom of speech, but I don't think that people have the right to sing sectarian songs which are heard in other people's living rooms, if you follow me. I don't think you have to should be in a position to either hear a sectarian chant or turn the sound down when you're watching a football match. To me, that's not, it's not a question of just voluntarily going along to the game. And that was what was in my mind, and it actually worked, of course. There's a great story about the Rangers fans when they were suffering a bit, if you remember, after their financial woes, that they were working their way through the divisions, and they drew Berwick Rangers away from home, which of course was in England. And of course the fans, or some of them, I'm talking about a small element no doubt, they thought this was great because they'd be out with Scottish jurisdiction and would be able to sing what they liked in Berwick. They didn't realise that I'd put an extraterritorial bit into the legislation and they all got arrested afterwards. But I don't know. I thought the legislation was worth making a stand against for, and I think the people who stood against it had ulterior motives. I was sorry when I saw it repealed. I think it could have been probably exercised better, but nonetheless the intentions were right, and I hope we get to a position, and I think we are coming to that position, when people will regard sectarian behaviour as unacceptable through society, unacceptable in day-to-day living, unacceptable at work, unacceptable at prayer, and certainly unacceptable in the terracings of a football match, in my opinion.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we have slightly less than 8 minutes left, so that means I'm going to ask everyone, including John on the panel, for 30-second closing remarks. I mean, you can immediately start to quickly prepare. If you wish, you can waive your right to say a final remark. But that allows me 2 questions from the audience, from the floor. Yeah, lady there. Yes. Thank you very much indeed. One more question, we'll take them both together. What's your name, sorry? Catherine. Thank you, Catherine. Any more questions? I can take one more. Yes, hello.
I appreciate my name is Crawford, by the way.
Crawford.
I appreciate the distinction about Scotland together, but why not allow anybody who's standing, which would be an independence candidate, to count their vote, without having to have a united party, a single united candidate?
Okay, thank you very much, Crawford. So, do you want to do the first bit about abstentionism? Catherine, we actually debated, had a very interesting debate at ALBA party conference, our main party conference last year, on abstentionism and all the points for and against. But perhaps, Alex, you may want to just summarise some of those points for and against, and the fact that we have debated it, as I've said, and then perhaps just answer Crawford's question as to why not do it the way that he's suggesting.
Well, firstly, Catherine, we decide on creative abstentionism, if you like. Abstention is a tactic which can work under certain circumstances, and your ability to deploy it would depend on the circumstances. For example, if the ALBA MPs at the present moment, the two of us decided, the two, Kenny and Neil, decided to abstain from the Westminster Parliament, the only thing they would get is attacks in the newspapers for not doing their work. It wouldn't bring about any other change. On the other hand, if they, as they did, intervened in the middle of Boris Johnson's last question time as Prime Minister, it gets worldwide publicity. So, it's a tactic. And it would depend entirely on the parliamentary situation. You would have a different attitude if it comes about that you hold the balance of power, which I think is unlikely. But if you hold the balance, then potentially you hold the power. And if you know what you're doing, and that's a big if, then you can work to Scotland's advantage. Equally, if you formulate a Scottish Constitutional Convention and you're in the middle of popular demonstration at home and international appeals abroad, you wouldn't be doing that from the benches of Westminster. So it's entirely a tactic and should be formulated on the best tactician that I ever met in politics, Dr. Winifred Ewing, who in 1974, in the February of 1974, said in her opinion the SNP were there to settle up, not settle down. Perhaps her words should echo through the years for some people. And for Crawford, the key about the Westminster elections, it's a first-past-the-post election. And although, yes, you would count a mandate, in my opinion, on a majority of votes, you've also got to pay attention to the number of seats in a first-past-the-post election. And you have to be careful that you don't make an intervention which would assist our unionist opponents. That is the confines of a first-past-the-post election, why an agreement in a first-past-the-post election is a good idea. An even bigger idea, of course, behind the agreement is to take the matter away from party politics and put it into national movement politics, especially at a point where party politics in the SNP is under a cloud. Take it off that cloud, off the track record of the SNP government, and make it on the principle of self-determination. But nonetheless, you have to pay heed to the fact it's a first-past-the-post election. A Scottish election, of course, is a different matter. A Scottish election, the more the merrier, as far as the list is concerned in the Scottish parliamentary election. The more independent parties that stand, the better, as far as I can see, in terms of maximising the popular vote. So it's horses for courses. You just have to, think, you have to mobilise the hearts, but you've also got to use your head.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Crawford. Now, would you like to, closing remarks? Anyone? John, would you like to add anything further?
Just closing remarks.
You've got 30 seconds and we're counting.
We in ALBA are resolute in our belief that we are in the early days of something great, a party which will one day take Scotland by storm. We're thankful to everyone who attended tonight or watched online. We really appreciate your support. And thank you to Gary and Stuart for coming down and filming it as well. So, people are needed, is what I want to put across. People are needed to drive the cause forward. The way I like to think about it is like if somebody was to wind a clock, somebody has to do it so that one day we can all hear it strike. The road to self-determination is well trod, but we all know that we're not doing it alone. And on this final lap, we must all cross the finish line together. Thank you.
Corri.
Ladies and gentlemen, delighted to be part of another successful We ALBA book event here in Troon with our South Ayrshire campaign unit. Despite the frustration that things aren't moving as fast as many of us would like, I am filled with both gratitude and determination. Gratitude for your unwavering support and dedication over the past 10 years, and the determination to finally achieve the self-determination that we all seek. To get to that destination, we need focus. Then we need to turn that focus into activism. Then the activism into activists, collaborating with each other for a shared goal. And as I said earlier, no one's coming to save us. We need to get off our backsides and make it happen. Yes, there's been setbacks and challenges, but we must remember that we are a country with a rich history, culture, tradition, a country not feared to take on its enemies or face up to its responsibilities. We are the envy of many nations and we deserve the right to self-governance. Through numerous mandates, the people of Scotland have expressed their desire for that independence, and it's now time to deliver. But let's not forget that achieving independence is not a passive endeavour. It requires active participation from each and every one of us. We cannot rely on others to secure our self-determination. It's up to us to make it happen. We must show up, attend meetings, organise events, engage in conversations with everybody we meet. The power to shape our future lies in our hands alone. It's crucial that we stand Scotland united, committed to our common goals and ensure that our voices are not only heard, but respected. I want to thank you for being here tonight, for lending your voice to the cause, and for being that integral part of our historic journey towards independence. Without you, none of this would be possible. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you here in Ayrshire on the campaign trail. Onwards to victory.
Thank you, Corri. Denise?
I would just like to say it's been a pleasure to host tonight the ALBA book event here in Troon. It's been a new experience for me. I'm hoping to see you all on the campaign trail in the coming weeks and the coming months, because we all deserve independence in our lifetimes, not any later, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Some final words, Mr. Salmond.
Well, I leave here with one great regret tonight, which is I unfortunately didn't arrive early enough to take part in the Highland dancing. Every night here, every Monday night in Troon Town Hall. And if you think this is a paid advert for the Highland Dancing Society of Troon, you're absolutely right. They gave me a £5 as I came in, and I'm telling everybody on Independence Live to get here. We are suitably attired for the Highland dancing on a Monday. I've had a lot of fun in Troon tonight. I had great fun when I've been at the Open Championships here in this wonderful town. But I'm remarking on the fact that, once again, Ayrshire is showing Scotland the way, as Bernard Kilwinning did once upon in the past, and as Robert Burns did. There was so much humanity and patriotism. So if we follow the precepts of these Ayrshire notables, then we won't go far wrong. I look forward to a country which mobilises its huge natural resources, the renewable well for the future, to make sure that nobody in this country is frightened to turn on their heating in this energy-rich country of ours, that every single business gets a comparative advantage to make them successful, and that every single child has an equal chance. That's a Scotland worth fighting for. Thank you.
Now, for those of you present here in this hall in South Beach in Troon, it's not all over for you yet, but it is time. There's much more fun to come for you guys. It is time to say goodbye to those watching us on Indie Live, and can I take this opportunity before the live is cut off to say thank you to, as ever, Independence Live and the wonderful Gary and Stuart for staying on longer, as you always do, and giving people the chance to listen to what we have to say. Can I also thank the local LACU, the local authority campaigning unit for the ALBA party here, for their organisation. As ever, can I thank our national organisation convener, Denise Finlay, who is doing 3 jobs at once and clearly tweeting from the meeting. Can't even take the time to take her own thanks. So thank you very much indeed, Denise, for that. Can I... For those watching online, if you haven't had enough, we've got another We ALBA Book meeting next week, Alex. I know it's next week. On Friday, the 7th of July in Edinburgh, where Alex will be joined by former Deputy Leader of the SNP, Jim Sillars, and former Chair of CND, Marjorie Thompson. So event not to be missed. But until then, to all of you online, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed this evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
To our wonderful chair, Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh.
Thank you, Alex.
Subject to availability of dates,